Consistency is key, they say, but how big of a deal is it when it comes to fantasy rugby in the MLR? The Fantasy Rucker Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 30 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thanks so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members. Thanks so much to our community members and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. I'm Ryan Yee. With me, as always, Matt Yee, Devin Vanderpool. Guys, episode number 30, and we're
Dirty 30,
here.
Baby.
Absolutely.
The dirty 30s.
Dirty 30. And yeah, we might be at 30 episodes in, but we still got a lot of stuff to talk about. It might be the off season too.
I'm in peak form, baby. I'm in peak form.
Exactly.
They always peak at the worst time.
Oh, come on.
Whole bunch of, we're starting off the top hot here, guys. So much to talk about. Yeah, it might be the MLR off season, but there's still a whole lot of drama going along around the MLR that we're going to cover about. Lots of news, lots of roster moves. Vandy, your Utah Warriors seem to be making a whole bunch of moves to set them up for the 2023 season. We'll break down and see whether or not it's moves that their newest fan actually likes. We'll see whether or not that's the case. But yeah, if you aren't following us already, at the Fantasy Ruckers, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. That's where you're gonna get the inside scoop on all the good stuff about fantasy rugby and the moves we're making, trying to make it a reality in the MLR. And hey, that's also where you're gonna find out when we are able to expand this thing. And if you can join a league of your own, you'll want to follow us there, because that's where you'll get the notification first and be in first to know about this whole fantasy rugby situation. But with that being said, man. Episode 30, lots to get into, so let's hop right into it. We got to ask TFR show question, and I don't know if you guys were aware.
Right off the top.
Baby.
Off the top. There's a draft coming up in about just a little bit over a week. Thursday, August 18th is when the 2022 MLR draft will be happening. It's coming up quickly. It felt like it was miles away, but it's right next week, and it's going to be really, really exciting to see the new kind of wave of young talent coming through the league. Hey, a guy was able to do it last year. Lasaga Tavit Lopetti of the Seattle Seawolves winning the Rookie of the Year, obviously making a huge impact in the world of rugby in the MLR and also in the world of fantasy rugby as well. He was absolutely able to make a dominant impact there. So we're going to try to look for that guy next Thursday. But before that does happen, we have a question for you guys about rookies in the MLR. Okay. And that question is, when it comes to drafting the rookies coming up in this 2023 year, how early are you guys willing to take a shot at one of these rookies? And if so, what situation does it have to be for you guys to make that decision? Matt, I'll let you guys go first.
I mean, look, there's already enough uncertainty with these drafts already. I mean, just look at the draft. My draft last year, half the guys I picked didn't even play for half the season. Half the guys other people picked didn't even play for half the season. You have no idea. And the one thing that's great about having a season under our belts finally is being able to have the data to actually rely on for guys who have played last season. You know, you can actually look at these points and say, okay, yeah, I'm not just guessing. I'm making an actual pick for a good reason. And the thing with these rookies is that you're essentially just guessing with these guys, you know. They're coming out of universities. You know, I don't know how much university rugby is you get to see or how much film you're going to want to watch. But yeah, it'll be a tough one for me. I'll probably have to wait until I have my every position solidified, and then I'll take a jump on a rookie to maybe see if they can fit in my bench. And if they start going off, then I'll just be lucky to have them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know what? I think I follow right behind with that same ideology. Weirdly enough, I agree with you, Matt. I think you're right. You know what? With the inconsistent, I mean, look at last year's draft. I think it drafted 3 teams worth of players. It just happened 2/3 of them weren't playing anymore. But I mean, it'll be a lot better this year, obviously. But no, same thing. I think the uncertainty I have with rookies and, you know, I'd have to agree. I think I'll get what I need, kind of lock out certain positions I'm hoping for, and then I'll take a stab. But I won't be sleeping on Cole this year. I can tell you that, boys. Woo!
Well, good thing he ain't a rookie.
Yeah, ain't a rookie this year, that's for sure. He's got his first MLR season under his belt. Yeah, a really interesting point, guys. I think, to your guys' point, the way that fantasy rugby in the MLR operates already, it's very, very volatile. I mean, we've mentioned that on episodes throughout the season, throughout this off season, and just reminding people that just the way that it was formatted, it was very volatile, very up and down. It was hard to predict, especially Matt, what you were saying, that we didn't have any of these stats to go off of from the previous year. We had kind of some underlying stats that we were able to extrapolate from the season before, from that 2020 season, but ultimately we didn't have that fantasy rugby season under our belt. But now that the inaugural season has happened, we can kind of make maybe a little bit of a better educated guess on how kind of some of these guys will perform. Very interesting point. To your guys' for your guys' reference, Tavit Lopetti, who we just mentioned, who won Rookie of the Year and probably had the biggest impact as a rookie in that last 2022 season, he was drafted 6.6, so 6th round, 6th pick, so still pretty high, middle tier rounds. Obviously, a lot of expectation happening coming into the season with him. So I believe it was Rugby Morning who did draft him, and obviously that paid off for him, getting that Rookie of the Year on his squad. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what fantasy managers are willing to take that roll of the dice on a guy that is going to possibly have a fantasy impact.
I mean, this is where it's going to pay off. If you're, big into the scenes of U.S. rugby and U.S. collegiate rugby and who's coming up and who's, coming through the ranks of the Eagles, maybe even some Canadian guys, that's going to be an advantage when you're scouting out these rookies and deciding when to draft them. I mean, I'm assuming Rugby Morning knew Tavit Lopetti was going to be a big thing when he drafted him in the 6th round. So, I mean, I didn't know who the heck the guy was, but Rugby Morning is clearly tuned in.
Hey Ryan, do you have any other notable rookies, or am I?
So I was just going to get to that. So right here, so kind of talking about the other rookies that maybe could have, also a fantasy rugby impact. I want to mention kind of the situational idea of these rookies, because I think this applies to a lot of different fantasy sports. And Vandy, you could probably relate to this most when it comes to fantasy football. But as much of you want to take into account the draft capital that is used on these players, getting picked, in the top, 10 picks or what have you. Situation matters, man. If you're going to a crappy 100%. Team, right, and they just, aren't finding the try line, aren't getting into the offensive zone, aren't on a team that is having a lot of possession, it doesn't matter if you were picked in the top 10. True. You're still not going to have those opportunities to gain those fantasy points. So this is, to answer your question, Vandy, another notable rookie that was picked in the 2021 draft was Eric Napolsky, and he was on the Dallas Jackals. Yep. He was first overall pick in 2021. But that didn't matter because the Dallas Jackals weren't good. So he wasn't getting the opportunity. He wasn't getting the scoring chance.
He fell, he fell off the thing. So
he was part of the ones that fell.
He was part of the ones that fell. So he was having a tough time himself. You know what I mean? Like you can't really. I'm Ryan. You set me up for that one. Look, you bring up Eric Napolsky, right? I had him on my team when he fell off the thing, right? Okay.
He fell. I'm like, what? From what? Heaven? Like, what did he fall from?
Oh, he fell from 7 feet, baby.
6 feet. Come on.
6 feet. I'm sorry. He's still causing to have a knee injury and come back like a superhuman for the end of the season.
He was 6 feet from the edge and he was thinking.
Well, nonetheless, to my point, though, regardless of whether it's the 7 foot, landing that you're falling off of, you could probably expect that, let's say, for example, Tavit Lopetti went to the Dallas Jackals. He's not doing what he was doing on the Seattle Seawolves.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. 100%. Matt. Yeah.
No, come on, man. Right. Come on, man.
Look, know. Hey, hold on, though. Let's give the Dallas Jackals some credit. They scored points. There was a person who picked up Eric Napolsky right before the incident happened because he was scoring tries.
Okay,
was he not scoring tries? He was scoring tries. I had him on my team. I don't always make great selections. I don't always make great selections, but he he was a good selection until, fate
All
took
right,
it into his hands.
let me pull this up for you. Let me pull up the weekly performance for Eric Napolsky. Okay.
Please,
So yes,
please.
he went on a 3-game stretch where he had some fantasy significance. 8.5 fantasy points in, I believe, week 5, 6.8 in week 6, 5.8 in week 7, and then from that season on, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0. 0, 1, 0, and yes, that has to go with some of those games.
Ones and zeros. He's trying to recover. He's trying to recover.
For a guy, dude. I gotta say, Vandy, for a guy that has been bagging on the Dallas Jackals for this whole time, all of a sudden this guy pulls a 180, and all of a sudden the Dallas Jackals are the best team in the MLR.
No, the Dallas Jackals.
What is going on here?
Eric Napolsky. That guy made it work for some of the season before the incident happened.
He hit you up off season. He's like, draft me, baby.
Hey, me and Napolsky, we go way back.
All right. So are you going against my whole concept here, Matt, that situation doesn't matter? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that situations don't matter, but hey, if the guy scores tries and the guy scores tries.
Okay.
No, they lose.
It wasn't as much as what
they lose by 50, but he scores a try every game. I'm still picking him up.
Sure.
But he didn't.
Sure, but he didn't. Yeah, exactly. He
Well,
had a
he
3-game stretch.
If we're talking pure hypotheticals,
He would.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I would pick any player that can score a try every game, but that doesn't happen. And, it's not going to happen on the Dallas Jackals, too, because, they're not last season, that's for sure.
Move on. Andrew Coe says that if some guy gets drafted by the Dallas Jackals, you should pick him up because apparently they're going to be dope this year.
But he did say that.
All right.
That's
so now
where you flip switch, eh?
Right, from last to worst. He's now all of a sudden exactly. The Andrew Coe inside scoop. I don't know. But where I'm getting this from, though, I will give a shout out to at MLR Stats on Instagram, at Jam Delay on Twitter. He's on MLR Stats on Discord as well. He's in our community. He's been dropping off some great content in our Discord community. If you're not in our community yet, make sure you check it out. The link is below in the description. But he came up with a great little graphic here that has all this stuff. Just to go over as we kind of tie a bow on this Ask TFR show question for this week. In 2021, there was 3 rounds of drafts, 39 draft picks. Eric Napolsky, like we just spoke about for way too long here, first overall pick of that 2021 draft. A total of 130 MLR caps for all the rookies last season. 69 MLR stats across all rookies in last season as well. 21 tries scored. 3 weekly team 15 selections. And yes, I mentioned Tavit Lopetti as a rookie of the year. So kind of cool insight into kind of the rookies that made an impact last year and kind of what they were able to do, and kind of a little bit of insight of what they may be able to do in this next season for the draftees that are coming in August 18th, next Thursday.
I wonder if those stats counted those guys who skipped out on the draft and decided that they were going to fool the system.
I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think it says on the title impact of MLR draft classes. So I'm going to assume that it's just the draft, not just rookies. But hey, I would have to go with that for sure. So and then Matt, I know you had some questions about drafts and about kind of the academy teams. What was your point on that?
Well, I was just wondering, I mean, what's the point of having a draft when you are trying to build academy teams as well? Shouldn't these guys in their shouldn't the clubs be enticed to lure guys into their academy to be able to develop them and then end up on their squad, rather than going through this whole draft thing and making it very North American? It just seems like kind of odd to have both the academy and the draft. I get it if you just have a draft, but no other North American sports has academies coming up that also is a feeder into their teams. I mean, like, you look at the NFL, there's no academies that are feeders into their teams. If you look at the NBA, NHL, none of them has feeders that don't come from the draft.
Well, is your academy like a farm team, or your academy just trains these guys to be eligible for the draft?
I mean, look at the Arrows, and it's like the Arrows have their Arrows Academy. Okay. Those Arrows Academy plays against other academy teams, the New England Free Jacks Academy. But we saw, I think, at least 3 or 4 guys that weren't drafted last year come through the academy and play for the Arrows this year. Those guys essentially don't need to go through the draft process.
Are those Arrows Academy players restricted to Toronto?
Yeah, but I'm assuming they have a contract with them if they already played for them.
Let me add some clarification here. So from what I understand, and I do think that the rules, not that they're kind of shoddy, but I think the clarity of them, for at least as a fan, is kind of ambiguous. I haven't really found many resources in terms of how it's exactly outlined how the academy things works. I would have to do a little bit more digging through that. But from what I understand, you can be draft eligible and still be on an academy team. Some people have been saying that through this homegrown player program, that the clubs will be able to protect one player that is draft eligible, and the other guys have to go through the draft process and can get scooped up. So it'd be interesting to see. I think as we go on, we'll see more and more of that and how that kind of operates, and this whole tandem between academy teams and drafting and stuff. Because Matt, you do have a point. It's interesting how the MLR is trying to obviously embrace the way that rugby has traditionally been operated from around the world, right? Around the world in leagues overseas, they all go through academy teams. There's no such thing as a draft for these teams. But then they're also trying to appeal to the North American crowd and give them this sense of, familiarity with how other North American sports operate and give them a draft. So they're kind of trying to do this hybrid thing. I agree with you. It does provide some kind of confusion, and I don't know if you can really have it both ways, because like your point, Matt, there are, I think, opportunities for people to take advantage of the whole situation, and maybe doesn't allow it to become a fair process in terms of, what the draft is supposed to do, which is supposed to kind of provide some parity in the league and provide, opportunities for worse teams like the Dallas Jackals or the Houston Sabercats the year before to kind of rebuild and retool and add important players to their roster. When you have an academy system, that kind of defeats that whole purpose, because then you're just drawing in guys. So it's interesting.
I mean, I was just thinking that, you protect a player in your academy system, but what happens if the guy is technically in your academy, but he came up and played a game for you last season, right? So he comes up and plays a game for you. He plays a game for you, and then he can be drafted again into the league.
I have no idea how that, right? I have no clue. Yeah.
But to that point, it's just there's a lot of ambiguity around it. Like, why do we have both? What's going on here? Like, what is the point, and how do you differentiate the two? Why can't I, as a team with an academy, decide that, hey, this guy is going to be a good draft prospect. I'm going to sign him into my academy squad before that, get him into a game quickly, the year before, and then decide that, hey, now he's on my squad. He doesn't have to go through the draft process. I can just sign.
Or hey, maybe they're not protected if they go up. Maybe they still have the opportunity. I have no idea. But yeah, Vandy, what were you saying?
I was gonna say the only way to me that it makes sense, and there's somebody who's not even aware of how it happens over in the other leagues, but it would be similar to hockey, where that's your farm team. You draft your academy players. They're under term for X amount of years, 3 years, whatever, and those are the players you can pick from. So instead of having a reserve bench, let's say whatever their reserves are, I think it's 8. They get 8 reserves.
No.
Something like that.
8 reserves.
8 reserves. I would think you would double that. And now that reserves is like a farm team similar to NHL, where those guys are interchangeable. You can bring them up, send them back down, but they're protected by your team for only a time limit, right? So maybe open up the league so that your draft is 18-year-olds or I don't know
the problem with that, Vandy, is the academy. So the way that rugby traditionally works is kind of similar to the soccer system, where it's like you have homegrown talent, you go out and scout guys, you recruit them to your academy team, and they don't even have to be drafted. So they're filling up their academy rosters with guys that haven't even been drafted yet. Do you know what I mean?
I would say then you can't have both.
Yeah, these guys are being developed in the academy from like the age of 16 potentially, or 17, or going, starting to go through that pathway. I know that the Arrows have a complete pathway from like U14 all the way up to Arrows Academy. There's a pathway that you are supposed to take and how you can get scouted and recruited into that Arrows Academy. And yeah, I like, but it's just a weird situation. Like, you're trying to tailor it to North America.
It's kind of like a weird system to begin with. The fact that you can, I don't know if it's like soccer, you can loan players. Is that a thing you can do? Could an academy loan a player to like New Zealand?
I mean, there have been loans in the MLR. There have been, like, we saw it last season.
Yeah.
We saw it last season where there were guys that were loaned for a few weeks and stuff like that. So I don't know. But I think what I would probably have to dig more into, especially ahead of next Thursday's draft, is see how the MLS does it. Because I'm pretty sure, right? Doesn't the MLS have a draft? They have a draft. And they do have academy. And they also have academies. So I think that would probably be the closest thing to probably have a look at. I'm not too familiar with the MLS, so I'm going to have to dig deeper in that and see how they operate it. I'm not sure what kind of the overarching or the general consensus of how that works is with MLS fans. Probably have to do some digging here, but
I mean, the only thing I was just going to say, the only thing I know about the MLS is that an MLR championship was won in an MLS stadium.
There we go. But yeah, I think that is a very interesting point, Matt, but definitely something that the MLR will consider. I mean, continuing to tweak with as we go out. I understand why they want to have a draft. I do think that it provides an extra kind of thing to do in the off season. You know what I mean? It's a thing that people are hyping up about. It's just like the NFL, right? It's something to provide people with content in the off season when there aren't actual games going on. So I can understand why there's a collegiate draft. But I'm not too sure kind of how that operates. I have no idea. We'll have to look into that a little bit closer. But yeah, definitely check out the graphics and all the other fantastic stuff that at MLR Stats is doing on Instagram, on Twitter at Jam Delay, because I took that graphic from him there and using that as kind of the framework for this question. And yeah, make sure you're checking out next week's draft, Thursday, August 18th. I believe, I want to make sure that I get this right. I believe it is 7 p.m. Eastern time on Fox Sports 2 and the Rugby Network. So make sure you're tuning into that as well. 3 rounds of drafts. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be cool to see kind of what players are coming up. And again, trying to see and work out how much of an impact this draft actually has on not only actual rugby in the MLR, but more importantly, guys, fantasy rugby.
That's right.
Exactly. So that will do it for the Ask TFR show question. Make sure if you got a question for us, you're curious about how fantasy rugby operates in the MLR, kind of interested about this project, how we're trying to make it a reality, make sure you hit us up on Twitter, Instagram using the hashtag Ask TFR show. Maybe your question will make it on the show and we'll enlighten you on everything that is fantasy rugby. So with that being said, let's move on here, guys, to the news and notes. And I got to say, whole bunch of roster moves going on, but it seems to be only happening from one specific team, and that team just happens to be the team that Vandy is a fan of. So I'm not too sure, Vandy, if you got any inside connections yet with the Utah Warriors, but it seems like your team is absolutely making moves this offseason to prepare themselves for 2023.
Sorry, what's that, brother? I was taking my sweater off.
Oh, I was just saying
he was getting hot just thinking about it. He knew that it was coming up. He was getting heated up. He thought, Utah's making all these hot moves. I got to take my sweater off.
Doing these podcasts are Christmas morning, boys. I just get warmed up inside.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
My question was, Vandy, you pumped up about all these moves that the Utah Warriors seem to be making?
You say yes. I got something to say.
Okay, it's what do you call that? It's I don't know. I don't know how to feel. Okay. I seen Quadrant. I'm all excited about him last week.
Yeah. Do you have an issue with Utah hating hookers? Do they have something against hookers? Do you think?
I just don't understand.
You think they're against them?
The importance of the roster spot we gave up and the importance of the salary cap. And what's the ratio there? What's more worth? Is that player worth more, or is the salary cap worth more? Or was Quattrin worth more? And that's where I'm left off. I'm like, I don't know what we gained and what we lost.
The answer is
let's break it all down here, and maybe you'll be feeling a little bit better about this, Vandy, after this segment here. But let's break down some of the moves that the Utah Warriors have made over the past week. Yeah, the first one, we mentioned it last episode, and Vandy was pumped up about it because he had the hooker replacement. Andrew Quattrin was coming into town, traded from the Toronto Arrows to the Utah Warriors for that extra international slot. It looked like there was the replacement set ready to go for this upcoming season. Vandy was going to draft him first overall. He was going to go right into the fantasy championship, get his name on the jersey back here. It was going to be all on the coattails of Andrew Quattrin.
First of all, I do, eh?
Right, exactly. and lo and behold, less than a week later, Andrew Quattrin gets traded to the New England Free Jacks for 2023 cap consideration.
You know, I'm starting to think that maybe Andrew Quattrin got traded to Utah and said, took one flight to Utah and said,
Yeah.
and then just got sent right.
He's like, you know what?
He said, "Oh, I'll go to New England. They look like they'll be in a much better
Bible
position."
Belt. I'm out.
So yeah, really interesting. Vandy, you kind of touched on it, but yeah, ultimately the net move ends up being that the Utah Warriors trade away an international spot for cap considerations. And you're right, I have no idea what the value of either of those things are. I don't know how much cap do they get. I guess not, and I agree with that. Matt. Why don't you get that off your chest with?
Hey,
with
they're not as valuable as Quattrin. You know, these are all salary cap or all what ifs. You know, this international slot, bunch of what ifs. You don't know who you're going to get with that. You know, you don't know what you're going to do with this extra salary cap. But you know that Quattrin can produce. He's proved it in this league, not just for MLR but for Canada. This guy was a guy that I think Utah should have kept, especially with the position that they were in. You said it, Vandy, you know, Chad Go, but we talked about this last week. It was a great kind of pickup for them. I don't know why, but they decided that they didn't need the absolute mutant they call Q.
From what my insiders are telling me, that it has to be from we either have
insiders? You tell me what insiders.
Hey.
Is this the 43 guys on Reddit? Hey, the 43 guys in the Reddit community that you guys talk about. You guys meet up every Wednesday to make sure that you guys have all your sources linked.
Hey, 43 guys, I love you. But no, man, for my sources.
Yeah, okay.
I hear it's got to be something. There's got to be something in the works as far as a draft, an academy player, something of that nature.
You think so, eh?
I hope.
I guess so, yeah, because I mean, getting the hype about Quattrin, a guy that obviously had huge rugby impact, huge fantasy rugby impact. I mean, finishing 183rd ranked on the season may not seem that high, but hey, he was able to get into the try zone 3 times, started 13 matches last year, had the opportunity, 16 of appearances in there, a total of 822 minutes about. A guy that saw a lot of rugby and was going to make a huge impact, and now he'll look to do that on the New England Free Jacks.
Yeah, and at least Utah can get the 18th best player in the draft. You know, at least you guys can do that. You know, Q 18th best player in the draft. You know, I guess you guys choose your priorities yourself.
You think
all right, but that's a separate move. We'll get over to that now. Nice segue there, Matt. But yeah, so moving on to the next Utah Warriors move, the Utah Warriors have traded away James Vifale to the NOLA Gold for their second round pick, their 18th overall for the 2022 MLR Collegiate Draft. So, in addition to getting that those cap considerations, they now have an extra pick in that second round. I think as we go on with these years, we'll start to understand what the value of these picks are, what the value of these cap considerations are, and this international slot is. So
right now,
I mean, what a trade for NOLA for getting a player. You know, for I think they have like 3 or 4 picks in the first round. So this 18th pick, really, you know, what's it to them? They have like 3 or 4 picks in that first round. They're going to get all the guys that they want on their squad in that first round. What is a second round pick to them when they can get a guy who has experience playing it? What do you mean don't underplay that pick?
Well, okay. So to be devil's advocate
for NOLA, it is specifically not as valuable. They have so many first round picks, but just for NOLA, this trade works for them, you know. But other teams, guys like, you know, maybe New York, Rugby New York, all they've got is that one pick at the end of the first round. You know, they could have, you know, they would have valued a second round pick, being able to get another guy to draft. But NOLA, to them, it's like, hey, we got three picks in the first round. Like the second round pick, we're already going to have our guys after the first round.
Yeah, NOLA's picking 3rd in the first round, 6th in the first round, 7th in the first round. They traded away that 18th overall pick, the 5th pick in that second round, and still NOLA does have a second round pick still at the end in the 13th. So yeah, for NOLA, it's a no-brainer. But hey, for Utah, I mean, it's not a terrible trade though. You're talking about a guy, right? James Vifale. Let me just pull him up here. Hold on. I believe He didn't have any crazy impact last season for the team. So to get a guy and hey, maybe they're trying to open up a roster spot. You don't know. James Vifale, he was able to, he appeared in 6 matches last season. 3 of those he started. Didn't really make any fantasy impact wise. I'm sure he had a bigger impact from a rugby standpoint. But hey, Utah gets a 2nd round pick, one that probably NOLA doesn't need, and NOLA gets a player that they could possibly use going forward in the 2023 season. So kind of a win-win situation, I think, for the 2 teams.
For sure. And the crazy thing is Utah still ain't done.
Utah still ain't done.
They got more moves.
So then they said, hey, we still don't got enough cap room because even though we traded away Andrew Quattrin for cap considerations, you know what? We got to open up more space. And I think this is why Vandy and his sources seem to be thinking that there's some big signing coming, because they traded away Mike Geiselman to the Seattle Seawolves. Mike Gieselman. There we go. Gieselman to the Seattle Seawolves for more salary cap considerations. Gieselman is a back rower for Utah. He was, let me see here, pull it up. He played in
3 games, I think.
Started 3 matches, appeared in 12. So had a significant appearance with the Utah Warriors, but from a stat perspective, not much, at least from a fantasy standpoint. So another player moving on from the Utah Warriors and going to the Seattle Seawolves.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like the Utah Warriors are really trying to make sure that they don't run into any issues like other teams in the league and ensure that they're staying under the cap.
Yeah.
Boom, roasted.
Exactly.
I don't know, and maybe you guys have some crazy signing coming, but I don't know who you're learning to come to Utah.
Baby,
okay,
get ready.
who are you learning to Utah?
And then just moving on to some quick other roster moves. The Toronto Arrows, they have announced the return of their franchise points leader, Sam Malcolm. He'll be back in the blue and white playing for the Arrows in this 2023 season. Huge staple from both the T, from a distribution standpoint at fly half, a huge player for the Toronto Arrows. So no surprise that he has committed at least the next season to the Toronto Arrows. So that's interesting enough. And then the Arrows also making another move. They announced the signing of Nick Ben, Canadian eligible Australian. How do you say? Did I say that right? Australian eligible Team Canada, Canadian eligible Australian.
He's a Canadian eligible Australian. There we go. I mean, the Arrows have such a big advantage being able to pull these guys back from overseas. Some might have some ties to Canada. Just able to pull them back and say, hey, yeah, we'll pay you to play here and also have a chance to represent the country. This guy's 21, I think, and he's coming 21. Back. He probably realized that, hey, I'm not playing for the Wallabies, so I might as well go and come back to Canada, get paid to play there, be able to represent a country that his mother was born in,
Hey, I think you guys are missing the big one.
What's
he's
up?
Canadian born, he doesn't take an international spot either.
There you go. Another huge one. So it's like,
we go.
So the other thing is, I thought, initially you look at this.
Not just the dummy, boys. These sources, baby.
The sources. Okay. The sources are too much in your head, bud.
They live in there.
But what's it called?
Sources in there, baby.
The international spot. I thought they're going to have to use it for this guy, right? And then they talk about how he's Canadian eligible. Then you bring it up perfectly. He doesn't have to use the international spot. Who are they using this international spot for Q for? This guy better be a pretty valuable guy that they're thinking of signing. But that's a few big news in the past week of Sam Malcolm and Nick Ben.
Yeah.
I wonder what else they got up their sleeves, just like Utah.
Now it is interesting, and this is the last thing I want to touch on the Toronto Arrows. Obviously, we mentioned it before that the Toronto Arrows they have historically have made a huge emphasis on that homegrown talent idea and really bringing up guys from Canada through their system and using the Arrows squad as something that is really going to complement Rugby Canada and promote the growth of rugby and skill level north of the border. It does feel like they're slowly maybe not moving away from that, but at least not having as high as an emphasis on it, realizing that, hey, maybe we're going to have to do a little bit more and rely on more international talent to really make moves here in the MLR.
I mean, look at Rugby New York. I think
exactly. I was just going to say.
Always the league with those guys. I mean,
look, Toronto's Toronto's been a home for Uruguayans, okay? There's been a bunch of Uruguayans. Gaston
be anymore. It'll
Muir,
be Dallas.
Thomas de la Vega, Thomas de la Vega, all these Uruguayans that are coming there, they have gotten their fair share of international guys. They're just not all blacks and they're not all, Wallabies
True.
and not former, Springboks.
True.
Bro, I just had a mental lapse and I thought you were like, they're not all black. I'm like, whoa, dude, take it easy.
Come on, Manny. Why'd you have to go there?
Mental lapse.
All right, and then just a couple last things here. Don't really have to spend much time on it. A couple front office moves. Ogori DC has named Marcelo Blanco as their first general manager of business operations in franchise history. Not really sure if that's going to have really any fantasy impact. And then the NOLA Gold have signed general manager Ryan Fitzgerald to a contract extension. So clearly they are happy with the way that he's managed and developed the NOLA Gold club, and he's agreed to a 5-year contract extension for the NOLA Gold. So definitely in it for the long haul. Yeah, with having those 3 picks in that first round, I'm assuming maybe he'll provide a little bit of extra motivation. He won't have to be stressing about his job when he's making those picks. So hey, you never know. And then the last thing I do want to mention here, and we mention it every episode because we got it. What are we calling it now? So it's got to be like the Gilchrist watch, right? Like we got that's basically what it is.
Gilchrist files.
Yeah.
Not much, and it's again all of this allegedly. Just thinking things that we're hearing through kind of the cracks and stuff. I've heard comments about things like this, but it does seem like negotiations in terms of that whole situation between Gilchrist, between the league, between potential future owners have been going on smoothly. Bill Webb, the Toronto Arrows co-founder, he hopped on our friends over at the Rugby Wrap Up, who some of them participated in our Fantasy Ruckers Playoff Challenge. They had an opportunity to interview him, and he has said on there that the AG and LAG negotiations have been pretty civil, and he thinks that there will be 13 teams next season. So not really any shocking news, but whether or not we know that Austin is going to still be in Austin, we still don't know, but at least we'll know that those 2 teams aren't going anywhere in terms of the actual team themselves. So just a little update there for you guys, because I know we got to mention it every single week because we want to be the first to say it when those teams do inevitably either move or change ownership or what have you. So some
Mr.
interesting stuff there.
Come speak your mind on this show, all right? Mr. William Webb got to speak his mind. Now you tell your story on our show. We're happy to have you, big man.
There we go. And then the last thing, you guys talked about the All Blacks. You guys talked about the All Blacks. You guys talked about the Wallabies. We got to talk a little bit about international rugby here. I just want to touch it. What happened over the past weekend when it comes to the Rugby Championship? New Zealand just not looking the way that they used to. When was the last time that New Zealand has dropped all the way down to 5th, and we have 2 Northern Hemisphere teams, 1 and 2, with Ireland and France? Pretty crazy stuff, man. A wild time for the world of rugby, both overseas and here stateside in the MLR. So just something that I wanted to kind of lay out there as people kind of think about and ponder what has happened to what used to be known as the most dominant rugby club in the entire world. Not looking so dominant as of right now, but we'll see whether or not they can shift things around. So with that being said, that wraps up our news and notes portion of the show. Time to move on. What most of you have all been waiting for is the consistency rankings, and this is something that I know is very valuable in other fantasy sports. We're going to find out, like I said at the top of the show, whether or not this consistency stuff has as big of an impact as it does in fantasy rugby in the MLR as well. We understand, and we mentioned it before in this show too, about the volatility of fantasy rugby as the way it stands in our league, just based on the scoring, how it's very heavily try reliant. You're really looking for those kickers. You're looking for guys that have heavy interaction with the ball on the field, things like that. We'll see whether or not this consistency stuff really does make a difference here. So let's break it all down. And the way I want to outline it to you guys first, kind of the way that I've structured this before we really dive into it. I've categorized performances in 4 distinct categories: poor performances, okay performances, good performances, great performances. Okay. So those are kind of just your benchmark kind of thing. So great performances is going to be anything above 10 points. Good performances is going to be anything above 5 points. Okay performances is anything above 1 point, and then poor performances is anything below that. Because I think okay, like if you can get a guy to get the full 80 minutes, you're at least somewhat, content with them being able to at least put 1 point on the board. I mean, we've seen some pretty low scoring point affairs, and that 1 point can go a long way. I mean, we throw it back to when West faced Rugby Morning and lost by 0.1, or when Matt, was it you who tied with Malcolm there, I believe, in the season too? Hey, that 1 point would have gone a long way. So we're gonna break down how consistent some of these guys were, who were the most consistent by position in our league, and we'll go through all of the positions there. So I want to start off with front row players here. Ooh. And who is the most consistent out of all of our front row. And there's some interesting names, and what I determined was that players would have needed to play in at least 8 matches in order to qualify for this consistent ranking. Matt, you mentioned before the show, hey, they got to be on the field at least to be somewhat consistent. I thought if they can appear at least in half of them, keeping injuries in mind, keeping other things in mind, probably towards the end of the season, some of the better teams, resting some of the guys, things like that. So just want to keep that up there and at the top of our minds there. So to top it off, I'm going to list off the top three most consistent front row players that got at least okay performances. Okay, so from an okay performance standpoint, the most consistent player was Dean Muir of Houston, and we knew how impactful he was at that hooker position for the SaberCats. 60% of the matches that he appeared in, he was at least scoring 1 point. Follow that up by Hugh Roach of the Gilgronis on Austin, 58% of the time scoring at least 1 point, and then Marco Jan van Rensburg, 50% of the time he was scoring at least 1 point for a squad. Then we'll move over to good performances. Dean Muir 46% of the time, Hugh Roach 50% of the time, and Marco Jan van Rensburg 42% of the time. They were scoring at least 5 points. So with those 3 players in mind, does that really surprise you there to have those guys up there?
I mean, those are the guys that we really talked about all year. So
I was gonna say,
Dean Muir, Marco Jans, Bonds, Cons. That guy was always on our radar, right?
Every week.
And Dean Muir was honestly just the clear cut, that crazy trade in the middle of the year of our fantasy Ruckers season. Yeah. And he was just a clear cut. Yeah. He was just a clear cut front row guy that you knew was going to score points. But hey, Dean, congrats, man. You're 60% of the time you're okay. 48% of the time you're pretty good. How many times is he great, Ryan?
How many times is he great? Well, I think that goes to show you, though, how volatile this front row position is, because he only had 1 great performance all season long. So only 6% of the time was he getting a great performance, though. But I mean, to mention it, I mean, the highest great performance was 2 great performances on the year. And that was going to Peter Malcolm of San Diego, who had 12 appearances. 2 of those were great performances. So 16% of the time he was getting great performances. Pat O'Toole on NOLA, he appeared in 11 matches last season. 18% of those, two of them, great performances. So I think from the front row position, I think we're really counting on them just really getting those 5 point range, getting in there.
I mean, but do you want 2 times they play great, or you want and the rest of the time they're playing poor? Or do you want guys like Dean Muir who 46% of the time are playing good, right? Like that's half the season. They're playing good. And if to get that from your front row, that's definitely a plus and an advantage you got there.
Yeah, so just going down the list from good performances, which again is the over 5 points. That is Hugh Roach at 50%, Dean Muir at 46%, and Marco Jan van Rensburg at 42.8%. And their fantasy rankings respectively, 55th overall for Hugh Roach, 14th for Dean Muir, and then 36th for Marco Jan van Rensburg. So clearly we're starting to answer the question here that consistency is pretty key when it comes to pushing yourself up there in those fantasy ranking point or fantasy ranking standings. So those were your front row positions. So now let's go to the position I know that you guys absolutely love and have so much fantasy impact, and that is the second row, because you guys love the second row position. If I'm just sorting it out here, seeing out who is at the top for okay performances. Tavit Lopetti of DC, Nate Brakely of Rugby New York, and then Ben Mitchell of San Diego. So so 9 okay performances out of 11 for Tavit Lopetti, 10 out of 13 performances for Nate Brakely, and 12 out of 16 performances for Ben Mitchell were okay performances.
I was out here thinking we were never going to see a guy on our team on one of these lists, because our guys are never consistent enough for us. But hey,
and this is
Ben Mitchell out here, and I'm hyped.
And now see, the thing is that when you start then looking at, and I think this is more of an indicator of how kind of volatile the second row position is and how much harder that is, how much harder it is to predict. Remember when we did the flex and the fantasy roster construction episode a few weeks back, we really start to realize that, you know, having a front rower at that forward flex position may be very valuable. Having that, you know, spine back row position, having an 8-man there that is really involved is going to have, you know, that advantage of playing at that forward flex position. Second row was not up there, and that's why I kind of sarcastically said that second row was your favorite position to understand. But yeah, I was
consistent at the worst position. That's good. Okay,
now, do you want to know who the best second rower, the most consistent second rower, and I shouldn't even say consistent because it really wasn't that consistent, but the second rower that had the most good performances in their season?
Lay it on me, Kamish. Who is it?
Johann Mumson of Rugby Atlanta, scoring 4 good performances, so getting at least 5 points in a week. He was able to do that 26% of the time, and that was 4 out of the 15 appearances that he had. So
that was another guy that was on my squad.
There you go.
Look at me go. Hey, I'm killing it. I'm killing it in the second row, baby.
Blast.
Because it's the second row. It's the least valuable position. They don't do anything for you. That's why all my guys that I picked well in were in this position. Just wait. None of the other positions I'm going to have any guys in, and that's how it's just going to be.
Very, very true. And just to kind of put a bow on how inconsistent this second row position is, only 2 times the entire 2022 season were there ever a second rower that scored over 10 points. It was Paul Cellini and Yuri Van Vuren. And those are the only 2 guys that ever scored more than 10 points. Paul Cellini was that 1 week when it was his 50th cap,
Mick Rogers, you did that. You did that yourself. You gave him that try. You gave him that great performance. But hey, you're another guy on my squad. Look at that.
Look at the most consistent.
Hey, the most consistent second row picker of all time.
Dingers, eh?
I know exactly how to pick the least valuable position, boys.
All right, so let's now move on to the back row position and talk about players that were there. Okay performances. This is where you really start to see guys really start making an impact, because this is where guys, you know, I think we talked to, I believe it was Steven a while back, and maybe Rugby Morning, Fitzy said it as well, about how there's this kind of polarizing idea of whether or not you go for guys in your starting lineup that you know are going to get the 80 minutes, that are going to get that 1 point, or do you kind of risk it and maybe side with the guy that you may think or may know won't play that full 80 minutes or 70 minutes and get you that minutes bonus point, but has that increased chance or increased likelihood of getting into the try zone because of their involvement in the set piece or what have you. But when you're looking down the list, man, there are a lot of back row players that are pretty damn consistent at getting you at least 1 point. We're talking about guys like Bailey Wilson, Benjamin Bonasso, Matt Heaton, Cam Dolan, Michael DeWall, Lucas Rumble. These are guys that are above 80% of the time scoring you at least 1 point. but their percentages when it comes to good performances, getting you at least 5 points, at least 10 points, it falls off pretty quickly. So kind of that idea of siding with different guys is pretty interesting. So I want to really highlight who is consistent from the back row position last season at getting at least a good performance, because clearly a lot of back row players were able to get at least 1 point. Not often where they're getting subbed out. So I don't think you're having any particularly big advantage by picking guys like that. So you're looking for guys that are scoring tries. The top consistent guys at scoring good performances, that is more than 5 points, more than 5 points, was Hanko Germicius at 66%. 8 of his 12 appearances were over 5 points, followed by, lo and behold, Reichert Hadding. We knew that he was going to be up there. 7 of his 16 appearances were above 5 points. That is 43%. And then that's followed by Gideon Van Wyck, which had 5 good performances, 38% of the time out of his 13 appearances, 5 out of his 12 appearances were above 5 points. And then to wrap it off, Slade McDowell of the New England Free Jacks also having 5 good performances over 13 appearances over the course of 2022. Anything kind of jump out to you there, guys?
Yeah, that's a lot of names that I didn't have on my team.
I mean, the Hanko.
Is that what this is going to be, Matt? Just like, that guy was on my team, that guy wasn't. That's going to be the basis of your analysis.
No, it's not going to be the basis. It's just telling me why I got, last place. I'm just hearing that clearly I've made some wrong consistency issues and decisions. And when consistency is key, you got to make the right decisions. But I'm not surprised by any of those names. Those guys are a bunch of studs.
And the way that I'm starting to get this as we breaking down the numbers is that, it's going to be important to get those guys. And I think when it comes to fantasy, fantasy rugby in the MLR, I mean, we saw it a lot where some guys would have these explosive games. And I'm sure we're going to see it a lot more when it comes to the back 3 position, because you're going to have some guys, that went off for 25 plus points, right? And that accounts for more than, a quarter of the fantasy points that they had all season. That's not very consistent. And that's not helping you win matches. The guys that come to mind, Jason Dominguez, Wes had him. He was on a tear at the start of the season, scored most of his fantasy points, was still able to finish pretty high in the fantasy rankings, but a lot of that coming from a select few games. So I think this is what's becoming clear to me, guys, going into the next year's draft, is that you're not looking at total fantasy points. You're not looking at the production. You're looking at how many times was this guy able to get above a certain point threshold, and will he be able to do that for me throughout the season? Because it's going to be way more valuable for you to let's say you have 2 players, right? Both of them finish in the top 50, but one guy scores half of his points in 2 games versus a guy that is able to just get 5 points, 5 points, 5 points, 5 points.
You know what? It reminds me a lot of like my Mitch Wilson pick, where he would do nothing, zeros, like get legitimately zeros, and then pop off for 15. I think he did that 2 or 3 times this season. And I'm telling you right now, he probably didn't get 5 points 5 times.
Right.
And every time he did get 15, he was sitting on your bench because you didn't trust him to get 15 because he was getting so many zeros, right?
2 of them I played him. Get out of here.
Come on.
Get out of here.
Didn't help you much anyways.
All right. So now moving on to a very notable position. You guys could probably guess who was the most consistent guy when it came to this position, but it's time to look at the fly half position before we get to the scrum half. We're going to get to fly half first.
Holden Younger, baby.
No, not scrum half, not scrum. We're getting fly half first. Fly half. So we're starting off at the top. We know who's at the top. We know who scored the most fantasy points this year, and that is Bodine Waka. Most consistent when it comes to good performances. 66% of the time he was scoring above 5 points. That was 10 out of his 15 appearances. But what gets really, really special is the fact that 26, a quarter of his performances, he was scoring at least 10 points. 4 times in the season, he's scoring above 10 points. And that in some weeks that could automatically decide you a week, because we had we had fantasy managers throughout the season that weren't able to break the 10-point threshold with an entire roster of players. So very, very interesting. Not going to go from the fly half position by okay performances. Out of the top 10 guys, basically all of them were kickers. So we knew that these guys were going to score at least 1 point. So it's really what is really going for me, at least at the fly half position, is these good performances and these great performances. So like I said, Bodine Waka at the top 66% of the time with good performances. That's followed up by recently signee, we just talked about him, Sam Malcolm, 61% of the time. 8 of his 13 performances were good performances, followed by Mac Mason and then AJ Alatimu, a guy that is pretty was making a tear towards the end of the season there. Pretty solid stuff. And the reason why Joe Peterson is not on this list is because I believe he lost his eligibility towards the end of the fantasy season to be back 3. So we'll see his name in a little bit later. But do you guys agree with me? That's what we're looking for, right? Good performances when it comes to fly half positions, kind of similar to the back row.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say that the kickers, it skews the points up every time, right? You know, like 1 is almost a given. And when you're thinking about the guy that you're assigning kicker, you know, you think of the guy that you're assigning that kicker, eligibility. If you get 1 point from your kicker, I mean, you're disappointed. That's terrible, right? Like you're looking for those goods. You're looking for at least the 5 points from those kickers, you know, and 10 when that guy's really on. So I totally
I agree. You expect 5.
Oh yeah.
You're right to expect 5.
Yep. Right. And since you guys are expecting 5, let's move up and let's raise that bar a little bit. Let's go to who is the most consistent, or at least who most of the time is scoring at least 10 points. And once again, Bodine Waka is up there 26% of the time. Like I mentioned, a quarter of the season in his appearances was he scoring above 10 points. But some surprising names: Rohan Saifaloy, 3 of his 12 performances were above that 10-point threshold. And then AJ Alatimu was next coming up there, 3 performances above that 10-point threshold out of his 15. So kind of interesting. I would have expected, honestly, a lot more great performances by these kickers. But hey, they're hard to come by and hard to get those dominant performances. I kind of, Vanny, and you'll probably relate to this a little bit. I kind of relate this fly half position, or at least whoever you have kicking, kind of as your quarterback, quote unquote. You expect in fantasy football your quarterback to get at least 20 points, right? 15 to 20 points. Anything below that, you're pretty disappointed. When you compare that to a running back in fantasy football, if a running back gets 20 points, you're like, oh my god, this is a fantastic week, right? If a running back gets 10 points, you're like, oh, that's a solid week. Not great, but not terrible. But if your quarterback gets 10 points, you're pissed about it. So kind of a similar situation.
You're dropping the next week.
Exactly. So a similar situation here. Very, very interesting. An interesting tidbit, though, out of all the fly halves that played this season, the only fly half that was able to get an unreal performance, not once, but twice, and that is 20 plus points, was Bodine Waka. No other fly half all season long passed that 20-point threshold. So that just showed you how much of an advantage it was to have Bodine Waka, at least in this past season, on your fantasy team.
Yeah, there's only one Bodine Waka, and that guy is a flock of walking flame.
And hey, well-deserved contract overseas in Japan now. Definitely.
Well deserved.
Yeah. So
no more 20+ points for us.
Yeah, hey, you'll be looking for another guy that's going to be able to do that next season.
That is crazy when you think about it. Like he's just gone. Like he's just not in the league anymore.
And I mean that's the nature of the MLR, right? When you're watching and consuming a league, and in this case, when you're creating a fantasy league that's surrounded by a league that is essentially a stepping stone for guys to move on to bigger and better leagues, this is going to happen. And I guess it just adds to that whole fantasy fun where guys are trying to deal with it.
Imagine doing a keeper league.
oh, dude, that would be ridiculous. You wouldn't know who to keep any year. You'd be like, what the heck is going on? What the heck is going on?
Every one of your keepers would just be gone, just signing contracts overseas, and you're left with nothing.
Exactly. All right. So moving on now to the scrum half position. Again, with the scrum half position, because of the amount of time that they interact with the ball and the amount of times that they're really the primary distributor, the amount of times that they are around the ball, around the breakdowns and things like that, you would expect that this position is getting at least an okay performance. And that is clear by the numbers. You're looking at even the lowest of the lows of the scrum halves are still at least getting at least 1 point 66% of the time. So clearly there's an advantage. There isn't an advantage there when it comes to picking scrum halves that are at least getting you 1 point. You want more from the scrum half position. Maybe not as quite as much as the fly half position when they're kicking, but definitely somewhat of increased output from a fantasy perspective over just racking up those 80 minutes played. So we're going to go to good performances. That's at least 5 points scored. And your top consistent guys at there is Harrison Goddard, Ross Brody, and Niall Saunders. You got 33% for Goddard, 30% for Brody, and Saunders 30%. Saunders, 3 out of his 10 appearances were good performances. 3 out of 10 performances for Ross Brody was good appearances, and 5 out of 15 appearances for Harrison Goddard were good performances as well.
Hey,
yeah, I'm not surprised there.
Where does my boy Yogurt square up on
yes,
that
Holden Younger. Let's take a look at here. So Holden Younger,
Yeah,
only
this guy was.
He had 11 appearances on the season.
Oh,
Here we go.
And he was only able to get a good performance 0% of the time.
oh, good. Way to go, Brandon. You had him in your starting lineup for all 11 of those games. That was good.
So, and even a better fact, you know how I said that 66% where that's like most of the scrum halves? Well, Holden Younger is only getting an okay performance 9% of the time.
Oh, there you go, Vandy. That's your guy right there.
1 out of his 11 apperances was he getting at least 1 point.
Boy.
So.
Oh, that was a dark time.
You stuck with him. You stuck with him. What a courageous thing for you to do, man. Younger appreciates it.
Hey, but Matt,
I felt like I had a target on my back at that point in the league. There wasn't. I wish I could sit here and say I wasn't looking for a 9. There wasn't a single 9 to pick up.
It's going to be, Vandy, it's going to be like the tight end position, man. It's going to be like even more
so
than
out
the fly
literally
half.
the hardest way you could find that out.
Yeah, you're going to want to pick a scrum half, especially because I remember going into last season, we made the ultimate decision to split up the scrum half and the fly half. I think originally we were thinking about having that kind of mixed position, that halfback position to go in there. But I think we made the right decision there. Just the importance of the scrum half and the importance of the fly half. It's good that we split them up. But that depth of that position, the amount of players that are going to be available to you on a weekly basis to pick up is not going to be there. So, hey, tip for the guys that are joining leagues next season or that are in our league, in the Fantasy Ruckers League next season. Hey, he might not, the fly half and scrum half that you're picking may not have the most points when it comes up your time to draft. But hey, if he's a solid scrum half, he's a solid fly half that you know is going to be getting minutes and he's going to be distributing the ball and can at least get more than 0% good performents than all the
Yogurt's good for a good year this year. Come on.
Watch him pop off this year.
Right. When the chops come out, it'll be good. When Holden Younger has the chops there, it'll
maybe
be
he has to shave him for him to be good.
Maybe make him faster, but Matt,
he scores a try and he just rips him off. They're fake the whole time.
No.
That's how it. Jeez, Matt, you'll like this one. The only scrum half that was scored an unreal performance all season long. You know exactly which week this was. You know exactly which week this was. Jason Higgins.
Ooh. Yes.
I think what was it, the 2 or 3 try performance that 1 week?
That was a 3 try performance that got me. Oh, that got me good. I just kept riding that Jason Higgins train, and he ended up scoring a hat trick that week.
That was good. It was a non-stressful week for you there, eh?
Yeah. When I saw him score 2 50-yard or 50-meter tries, that was about when I said, "Oh, I don't have to worry about this week anymore."
Yeah, GG. All right. Well, let's move on to the center position here, guys, and talk about who were the most consistent amount centers. Now, this is a position, again, not many centers are getting subbed out, I feel like. A lot of them are getting that 1 point. They're hitting that 80-minute threshold, if not at least the 70-minute threshold. So again, we want to take a good hard look at the good performances. Are they scoring? Are they doing more than just being on the field? Are they getting try assists? Are they able to score points? Maybe there's some centers out there that even kick too. We talk about guys like William Tailatina. He was able to kick this year, that added to that point threshold there. So top guys here: Junior Sau, Mark O'Keefe, Giuseppe Detroit and William Talataina. 46% for Sau, 42% for Keith, Giuseppe Detroit 40%, and then we got William Talataina at 37% there.
Well, that one surprised me. I did not think to hear Giuseppe in there at the center position getting 46% of the time. I mean, I don't even think he started that many games and he's still getting that 46% of the time. I mean, that's impressive.
40%,
That's
40%.
40% of the time. That's still, I did not expect that name. The other guys, I expect, but Giuseppe, that was news to me.
It's a minimum of what, 8 games you said, Ryan?
Minimum of 8 games. He made 10
So
appearances.
40% could be 3 games.
He made 10 appearances, so yeah, four of his games were good performances. Hey, that's still pretty decent confidence. I mean, like, hey, you got a decent chance that he's going to score more than at least 1 point come on a weekly basis. But to your point, Matt, that was reflective of the rankings, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he was able to get those 40%, but those other 10 performances may have not been up there. I believe we're looking here. Yeah, if he wasn't just scoring 1 point. He was either getting more points or he wasn't getting any points at all. And that is reflective in his rankings. He finished 100th on the fantasy rankings. But when you're looking at Junior Sau, he finished 15th in the season rankings. Marco Keith 12th and William Talataina 5th. So obviously, I think the learning point here is that you can't just take it for its face value. You're going to have to combine the total fantasy points there with the consistency. But at this point, honestly, guys, I would probably weigh the consistency, these percentages, way more than I would just total fantasy points at this point. Because I mean, to be honest, that's what we went off of last season for when I released the draft rankings for you guys without any prior knowledge, and that wasn't necessarily the most right.
How'd that work for us, Andy? How did that go working on that cheat sheet?
Exactly. Couple of things here to note. No unreal performances by centers all season long. So no center scored over 20 points. Looking at great performances, there was a huge threshold and discrepancy between the top guy here, William Talataina, 5 great performances. 31% of the time he was scoring over 10 points. But the caveat here, though, he was a kicker. So that kicking is going to go into it, and that is what is
your little sneaky cheater, Talataina, trying to sneak your way into these great performances.
There we go, and I'll sneak in.
There's definitely an asterisk there.
Yeah. I think anytime you see a K eligibility beside his name, you can automatically assume that the expectation increases tenfold when it comes to point production when you're talking about guys who have that kicking eligibility. So interesting there. Now time to get to the interesting position. I think this is the position. I think this is the position that everyone is waiting for because these were the go big or go home type guys. These were the guys that were scoring you weeks. There's a whole bunch of them. Right. And it was hard to choose who was going to do it on a weekly basis. But here we're going to find out who was able to do it the most consistently from the back 3 position. That's including your wingers. That's including your fullbacks. And the what do you want to go here by, guys? You want to go by okay or do you want to go straight to the good performances?
Give me the great performances.
Great performance. All right. I like that. Let's go into the great performances for sure. So. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Very, very interesting. So your top guys here. Joe Peterson, 33% of the time he was getting caveat. Yes, he was a kicker. So 5 great performances there. 33% of the time, this is a big one. Ed Fidow. He was the most consistent at getting great performances. Not surprising. He finished second on the season, 117 total fantasy points, 33%. Like I said, he was getting great performances. 46% of the time he was scoring at least 5 points. So almost half the time he was scoring. He was scoring at least 5 points. Pretty impressive stuff, man. Ed Fidow. I think that was something that you guys probably could have predicted.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then coming up behind him, Penny Lasaga ranked at 10th. Penny Lasaga, 28% of the time was his great performances. 4 out of his 14 appearances were over 10 points. And then Mitch Wilson, Vandy, 3 of his 13 performances were in the above that 10-point threshold, 23% of the time. Now, I think what's interesting is the good performances because I feel like when it comes to the back three position, it was boom or bust, right? They were either getting 0 points or they're either getting more than 5, more than 10. They were scoring that try. Once again, Joe Peterson was up there at 66% of the time. Obviously, there was a caveat there. Penny Lasaga, 57% of the time. He was also up there, though. But I think there's a caveat beside his name as well, because he also had that kicking eligibility. Not necessarily did he do it every single time, but there were a couple games in there where he was kicking, so that may have boosted up his points a little bit. Ed Fidau was up there, but some other names that are added to the list: Paula Bellicana, 45% of the time. 5 of his 11 performances were above 5 of his 11 performances were above 5 points. But a big one here, Vandy, you had him, Renata Roberts-Tanana, 42% of the time, finished 8th on the season from a fantasy points perspective. 6 of his 14 appearances had that above that 5-point threshold. So it's pretty interesting to see, kind of that varying.
If there were meters run as an asterisk or as a statistic, man, that boy would have so many points.
Why don't you count him this season, eh?
I was gonna say the same thing about Slade McDowell when we were talking about the back row positions, because if we added hitting in there, that would have been a whole different story as well.
I had Smith though. I had Mike Smith.
Hey, Mike Smith would have got you all the points if we had tackling, but I think that's a conversation for another time.
And then, funny enough, unreal performances. And what I'm starting to get here, guys, is that there were not many unreal performances this season above 20 points. There was only one back three position that got an unreal performance. Only one guy, and he did it twice. Ed Fidau. Twice he was able to succeed that 20-point threshold. I'm starting to realize that there's only a select few guys that can really do that on a weekend, and obviously there's a little bit of luck involved.
Hey, well, I think I found out why when I was watching the Canterbury team face the Manawatu Turbos against him, and this guy got absolutely torched. I mean, man, you got to watch the highlights. This guy looked like he looked like he was not number 2 in the MLR. Okay, Ed Fidau. He's playing in New Zealand right now. And he got absolutely torched. I mean, the guy clapped his hands trying to make a tackle. I swear. Yeah. This guy who had 2 unreal performances in our league.
I know that the most of your rugby experience these days have become through the MLR, man. I know Steven kind of gave you a shout out in the Discord channel and said, "Hey, man, have you been watching any of this Miter Cup?
I just seen that now, brother."
Man, if you are able to catch any of these games, Vandy, you'll start to realize the skill level difference between the top guys in this league and the top guys overseas. But nonetheless, it just goes to show you, if any of those guys come over here to MLR to play out their glory days, the guys like Nehe Milner-Scudder, guys like Wasaki Naholo, they can easily find a way to dominate the league. So definitely something to keep an eye on. But hey, that's the consistency stuff. I'll try to get these numbers out to our league members. I'll try to post
just us, Ryan. You don't need to send it out to everybody. Hold on. Just us. They can calculate it themselves. They've got spreadsheets, okay? Just
all right,
us.
thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yeah. Thanks everybody. You can just not have this. Forget all the stuff you heard. This is our seat.
But nonetheless, though, what are your overarching, as we close out this show, guys, your overarching kind of takeaways from hearing these numbers and hearing this consistency percentages from players at each position?
The one thing that I noticed is that, yogurt, that's your big takeaway, maybe. But
it's a position.
It's your big donut of a takeaway. But yeah, I mean, the one thing that I realize is that I don't want to look at the unreal performances. I don't need to know guys that are putting up unreal performances 2 out of the 12 appearances that they have, right? It's those guys that are putting up good performances, over 50% of their appearances. That half the season that you're getting at least 5 points out of these guys. And if you can stack up a bunch of those guys and have them be scoring 5 points for half your season at different times of the year, you're setting yourself in for a good one. And that's definitely something that I'm going to be looking at when we're heading into the next draft and when we're preparing for the next draft. And definitely something that will not be available to the public. I'm sorry.
I think I take the football approach in that. And I think it's always good to have one boom or bust guy. Looking back, I wish I didn't have Roberts and Mitch Wilson. They're very similar type in that, but I don't regret having them. I would definitely do it again next year.
Hey, how much booming did yogurt do for you? Lots of booming. Eh?
Now,
Hey, he boomed a lot.
Oh, he
booming
boomed.
zeros all over my board, baby.
Oh yeah, there we go.
but no, that's a good point,
I
Vandy.
believed in him too.
No, you didn't.
For 10 weeks, I believed
You
in him.
didn't like him. You were desperate. You had him because you had to.
But that is a good point, guys. I mean, I think you're going to win a lot of weeks. You're going to win a lot of weeks if you can get those guys that are going to be able to get good performances, especially if you're able to stack them up, like you said, Matt. But I think what's going to bring home, what's going to get you guys this chip back here is going to have that one guy. He's going to have that Ed Fidow. He's going to have that one Bodine Waka. If you have that guy, that's what's going to get your name on this jersey.
Yeah,
so we'll
that's
see
true.
whether or not that will be the case next year.
And hey, everybody, take it from me. You can't score. You can't win weeks if you're not scoring over 10 points. I know this from experience. Don't be me.
There we go. So a nice lesson for everyone. So final question here, because we asked at the top of the show, guys, is consistency key when it comes to fantasy rugby in the MLR?
Yes.
You know, at the end of it, no.
Come on, Andy.
Yeah, we go through all of that.
I thought we said
and we're just like, none of these numbers matter, whatever.
Yes, at the end of the show.
Hey, we're stubborn over here.
We
boys.
said we would
We're
answer
stubborn.
yes, and you come in here blowing everything up.
There we go. So, all right. Well, that just about does it there. We'll finish off there. We'll be back next week. Gonna have a different show next week. I believe it is just going to be either me and Vandy next week or just myself because there's some conflicting time issues, but we're gonna give you a nice little draft preview next week on what you can expect on that Thursday, August 18th. But with that being said, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I'm Ryan Yee, and we'll be back then. Make sure you stay tuned.
Mr. Gilchrist, sponsor us.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.